A humble little boy prevents a millionaire from falling into a trap and losing everything. Impressed, the businessman decides to help him, not imagining the impact of this choice. The boy's cleverness reveals secrets that could change both their destinies. Together, they begin a journey that will challenge the powerful and expose a great conspiracy. If this story interests you, subscribe to our channel to receive all our exciting stories. Continuing. In a small town in the Midwest, where time seemed to flow slower than the river that cut through its lands, lived Ethan, a 12-year-old boy who had a special gift. He could see the truth in people's eyes. It wasn't a supernatural ability, but rather the fruit of teachings from his grandmother Martha, a silver-haired lady with a welcoming smile, who had raised him since he was little with stories of wisdom and lessons about the importance of observing life's details. The simple house where they lived was on top of a hill with a view of the entire town. It was an old two-story home with walls peeled by time, but which held in every corner the love and dedication of Martha. In the backyard, a small garden cultivated with care by his grandmother served as a classroom for her most valuable lessons. "Ethan, my child," Martha would say while watering her orchids, "observe how each flower has its own time to bloom. It's the same with people. Each one carries their own truth, and we need to have patience to see it." That September morning, while the sun still struggled to break through the mist that covered the town, Ethan was helping his grandmother with garden chores. The old radio played soft music when it was interrupted by news that caught the boy's attention. The famous businessman Richard Westwood, owner of the largest luxury hotel chain in the country, was in town for an important business meeting. "Grandma, do you know this Westwood guy?" asked Ethan while arranging the potted plants. "Oh yes," replied Martha, adjusting her floral apron. "The Golden Star Hotel, that huge building downtown, belongs to him. They say he started from nothing and built an empire. But lately, the comments at the farmers market haven't been very good." Ethan knew the hotel well. It was the most imposing building in town, with mirrored windows reflecting the sky and its majestic facade that stood out from the simpler constructions around it. Sometimes, when returning from school, he would stop in front of the hotel just to observe the luxury cars coming and going, imagining the stories of the people staying there. At school, Ethan was known for his ability to perceive when someone was lying or hiding something. His classmates consulted him to know if they could trust someone, and even the teachers were surprised by his insightful observations during classes. "Ethan has a gift," the teachers would say in school meetings. "He sees beyond appearances." That afternoon, after finishing his tasks in the garden, Ethan decided to take a walk around town. It was his daily ritual, walking the streets, observing people, trying to understand their stories just by the way they moved or spoke. His grandmother always said these walks were important to exercise the eye. Passing by downtown, he noticed a different movement in front of the Golden Star Hotel. Several executive cars were parked, and men in suits were hurriedly entering and leaving. Among them, Ethan recognized Richard Westwood from newspaper photos. A tall man, with graying hair and elegant posture, but there was something in his demeanor that intrigued the boy. "There's something wrong with him," thought Ethan, noticing the tension in the businessman's shoulders and the way his hands trembled slightly when greeting people. Next to Westwood was a younger man in an impeccable suit and with a broad smile, whom Ethan immediately distrusted. There was something fake about that smile, something that didn't reach his eyes. It was Mark Davis, Westwood's main partner, although Ethan didn't know that yet. The boy stood there, observing the movement, when he noticed that Westwood had dropped a paper while hurriedly entering the hotel. Without thinking twice, Ethan ran to pick up the document. It was a folder with papers that seemed important, full of numbers and graphs that he didn't understand. "Sir, Mr. Westwood," shouted Ethan, running toward the businessman. Westwood turned, surprised at the call. His eyes met Ethan's, and for a moment something passed between them, a connection, a mutual understanding that neither could explain afterward. "You dropped this," said Ethan, extending the folder. Westwood took the documents, his hands still trembling slightly. "Thank you, boy. You have no idea how important these papers are." It was at that moment that Ethan noticed something else in the businessman's eyes. Fear. A deep and desperate fear that he was trying to hide behind his elegant posture. And it was also at that moment that Ethan made a decision that would change not only his life, but that of many other people. The casual encounter between Ethan and Richard Westwood could have ended there, with a simple thank you. But fate had other plans. As the ICTO businessman was putting away the recovered folder, Mark Davis approached with his artificial smile, interrupting the moment. "Richard, the meeting with the investors starts in 5 minutes, said Davis, casting a suspicious look at Ethan. "We can't be late." Ethan observed the interaction between the two men with attention. There was something in the way Davis spoke to Westwood, a subtlety in his tone of voice that sounded like false concern. The boy also noticed how Westwood seemed to stiffen even more at the sound of his partner's voice. "Of course, Mark, I'm coming," replied Westwood, turning one last time to Ethan. "Once again, thank you, boy." "Ethan," corrected the boy. "My name is Ethan." Westwood smiled, the first genuine smile Ethan had seen on his face. "Well, Ethan, you did me a big favor today." Before they could continue the conversation, Davis practically dragged Westwood into the hotel. Ethan stood there on the sidewalk, watching the pair disappear through the revolving doors. His instinct told him that something important was about to happen in that meeting, and he couldn't get the expression of concern on the businessman's face out of his head. Driven by the curiosity his grandmother had always encouraged, Ethan decided to enter the hotel. The lobby was impressive, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and decor that blended classic and modern elements. The staff moved around hurriedly, and no one seemed to notice the simple boy who sat in one of the lobby armchairs. From his strategic location, Ethan could observe the movement in the executive elevator and hear fragments of conversations. A group of men in suits passed by him, discussing in low voices. "The proposal has to be presented today. Westwood will have no choice. Davis guaranteed everything is prepared." The loose words formed a puzzle that Ethan tried to piece together in his mind. His attention was captured by an elegant woman who seemed nervous while talking on the phone near him. "Lisa, you need to listen to me," she said urgently. "Those documents you found in Mark's office? Yes, exactly those. No, don't do anything." Yet it's too dangerous. Ethan felt his heart accelerate. The woman was Jennifer Adams, Westwood's executive secretary, although he would only discover this later. She abruptly ended the call when she saw Davis coming out of the elevator, her face assuming a mask of tranquility that didn't fool Ethan. The boy observed Davis approach a group of investors in the lobby. His body language changed completely depending on who he was talking to, a social chameleon that adapted to each situation. He was the type of person his grandmother had always taught him to be careful of. Meanwhile, on the 10th floor, the meeting that would decide the future of the Westwood Empire was about to begin. Ethan couldn't see, but he could feel the tension hanging in the air. That was when he noticed Lisa, a young administrative assistant, hurriedly coming down the service elevator, carrying a folder similar to the one Westwood had dropped earlier. Without thinking twice, Ethan discreetly followed. Lisa quickly crossed the lobby, her hands trembling slightly as she held the folder. She stopped near the emergency exit, nervously looking around. "Excuse me," said Ethan, approaching. "Do you work with Mr. Westwood?" Lisa was startled, almost dropping the folder. "Who are you?" "I'm Ethan. I saw that you seem worried, and earlier I helped Mr. Westwood with some documents he dropped." Lisa's face softened a bit. "Oh yes, Jennifer mentioned you, the boy who returned the folder." "There's something wrong happening, isn't there?" asked Ethan, his voice low and serious. Lisa hesitated, looking around again. "You're very observant. For your age, Ethan, but this is adult business and it's better if you don't get involved. My grandmother always says that when we see something wrong happening and do nothing, we become part of the problem," replied Ethan, his eyes fixed on Lisa's. The young assistant seemed to consider the boy's words for a moment. Finally, she leaned in and whispered, "Meet me tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the coffee shop across from the hotel. There are some things you need to know." Before Ethan could respond, Lisa had already disappeared through the emergency door, leaving him with even more questions than answers. What was happening at that hotel? What secrets did those folders hold? And why did everyone seem so nervous about the meeting that was taking place? Ethan left the hotel with his head buzzing with thoughts. Upon arriving home, he found his grandmother preparing dinner, the smell of fresh spices filling the kitchen. "So, my child, how was your walk today?" asked Martha, noticing something different in her grandson's gaze. "Grandma," replied Ethan, sitting at the kitchen table, "you always say that when God puts us in someone's path, it's because we have something important to do, right?" Martha stopped stirring the pot and looked at her grandson with curiosity. "Yes, that's true. Why do you ask?" "Because today I think I was put in the path of someone who really needs help." The next morning, the sky dawned heavy with dark clouds, as if nature itself sensed the importance of that day. Ethan woke up earlier than usual, his mind still processing the previous day's events. He found his grandmother Martha already up watering the garden plants. "Grandma, I need to go to town today," said Ethan, while having his milk with coffee. Martha looked at her grandson with that gaze that seemed to pierce his soul. "Does it have something to do with what happened yesterday?" "Yes," replied Ethan, honest as always. "I promise to tell you everything later, but now I need to go." "Go with God, my child," said Martha, making the sign of the cross. "Just remember, sometimes what seems to be a very big problem can be solved with a small gesture of kindness." Ethan arrived at the coffee shop at 9:45, 15 minutes before the arranged time. The place was almost empty, except for a few executives who were hurriedly having coffee. He chose a discreet table at the back of the establishment, from where he could observe both the entrance and the hotel across the street. At 10 o'clock sharp, Lisa entered the coffee shop. She was even more nervous than the day before, her eyes quickly scanning the environment until she found Ethan. She sat with her back to the entrance, placing her purse on the table. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said, ordering a coffee from the waitress. "Why wouldn't I?" asked Ethan, his attentive eyes capturing every detail of the woman's behavior. Lisa sighed deeply. "Ethan, what I'm going to tell you is very serious. Actually, I don't even know why I'm trusting a boy I barely know, but something tells me you can help." She opened her purse and discreetly pulled out some papers. "Yesterday, while organizing some files in Mr. Davis's office, I found these documents. They're contracts and bank transfers that don't make sense. Huge amounts being moved to companies that don't exist." Ethan leaned over the table, observing the papers. Even though he didn't fully understand the technical terms, he could tell that something was wrong. "What else?" "For months I've been noticing strange things. Secret meetings, disappearing documents, long-time employees being fired without explanation. Mr. Westwood is being sabotaged from within his own company, and Mark Davis is the mastermind behind it all." At that moment, Jennifer Adams, the secretary, Ethan had seen the day before, hurriedly entered the coffee shop. Her face was pale. "Lisa, thank God you're here," she said, sitting at the table. "The situation has gotten worse. Yesterday's meeting was a disaster. Davis presented a completely manipulated financial report. Mr. Westwood is being pressured to sell his shares for a fraction of their real value." Ethan observed the conversation in silence, his mental gears working at full speed. "How do you know the reports were manipulated?" Jennifer looked at the boy in surprise, as if she had just noticed his presence. "Lisa, you brought a child into this." "He can help, Jennifer," replied Lisa. "He has a gift for noticing things that we don't." Jennifer hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Well, I've worked with Mr. Westwood for 15 years. I know every number, every hotel, every investment. The reports presented yesterday show losses in hotels that I know are profitable. They show debts that don't exist. But it's all so well done, so meticulously forged." "And why don't you tell this to Mr. Westwood?" asked Ethan. "It's not that simple," explained Lisa. "Davis has important people on his side. He managed to convince a large part of the board that Westwood is senile, losing control of the company. Anyone who tries to alert Westwood is immediately fired or transferred." Ethan absorbed every word, connecting the dots in his mind. And that folder that Mr. Westwood dropped yesterday? Those were the true reports, replied Jennifer. I was going to use them in the meeting to prove that the company is healthy. But Davis managed to switch them with the fake reports moments before the presentation. If you hadn't returned the folder, Westwood wouldn't even have noticed the switch. Suddenly, Jennifer's cell phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and her face turned even paler. My God! Davis has called an extraordinary board meeting for this afternoon. He's going to propose a vote of no confidence against Westwood. Lisa covered her mouth with her hands. If that happened, Westwood loses control of the company, completed Jennifer. Everything he's built over decades will disappear in one afternoon. Ethan remained silent for a few moments, his gaze fixed on the windows of the hotel across the street. Finally, he turned to the two women. Do you have proof of all this? Of the real documents, the manipulations? Yes, replied Lisa, but they're scattered. Some on the office computer, others in physical files, and we have no way to access everything without raising suspicions. Maybe, said Ethan, his eyes shining with determination. You can't, but I can. Ethan's plan was risky, but simple in its essence. Taking advantage of his harmless appearance and the fact that no one would suspect a 12-year-old boy, he would gain access to places that Lisa and Jennifer couldn't reach without arousing suspicion. Are you sure about this? Ethan? Asked Lisa, concerned. If Davis finds out, he won't find out, replied Ethan with conviction. My grandmother always says that people only see what they expect to see, and no one expects a boy to be a threat. The plan began to be put into action immediately. Jennifer, using her position as executive secretary, got a visitor's badge for Ethan, claiming he was the nephew of one of the cleaners and was waiting for his aunt to finish her shift. With the badge hanging around his neck, Ethan circulated through the hotel corridors as if he were invisible. The hurried executives barely noticed his presence, too busy with their own concerns. Lisa had given him precise instructions on where to find the important documents. On the 10th floor, Ethan found his first opportunity. Mark Davis was in a closed meeting with investors, and his office was empty. Lisa had managed to get a copy of the key, taking advantage of a moment of distraction from the businessman. You have exactly 15 minutes, Lisa said over the phone. The meeting is halfway through, but Davis is unpredictable. Ethan entered, the luxurious office with a racing heart. The place was huge, with a panoramic view of the city through the 10th floor windows. He went directly to Davis's desk, recalling Lisa's instructions on where to look. In the second drawer on the right, he found a red folder with documents marked as confidential. These were the original hotel reports, showing numbers completely, different from those presented at the meeting the day before. With trembling but determined hands, Ethan used the cell phone Lisa had lent him to photograph each page. He was so focused on his task that he almost didn't hear the sound of footsteps approaching in the hallway. He's coming back, Jennifer's alarmed voice sounded in his ear through the earpiece he was wearing. Ethan quickly put the cell phone in his pocket, replaced the folder exactly as he had found it, and looked around desperately. The office didn't have many places to hide, and he could hear the voices getting closer and closer. That's when he had an idea. He ran to the private bathroom in the office, the only place where he could hide. He had barely closed the door when he heard Davis enter the office, accompanied by other people. The numbers don't lie, gentlemen, Davis was saying in his mellifluous voice. Westwood has lost control. The company is sinking, and we need to act before it's too late. But what about the employees loyal to him? Asked a voice that Ethan didn't recognize. I've taken care of that, replied Davis with a dry laugh. Some have been transferred, others received offers they couldn't refuse. Soon there will be no one left to support him. Ethan heard everything, his heart beating so hard that he feared they might hear it. Through the crack in the door, he could see Davis sitting in his chair, casually spinning while he talked. And what about that secretary, Jennifer? She's worked with Westwood for years, questioned another man. Jennifer won't be a problem, assured Davis. I have something held against her that will keep her quiet. And if she tries anything, well, there are ways to deal with inconvenient people. Ethan felt a chill upon hearing the veiled threat in Davis's voice. He needed to warn Jennifer, but he was trapped there until the meeting ended. The minutes dragged on as he remained motionless in the bathroom, listening to Davis and his accomplices plan the destruction of Westwood's empire. Each new revelation was more shocking than the previous one. He discovered that Davis had created shell companies to divert money, forged signatures, and even blackmailed board members to secure their votes. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the meeting ended. Ethan waited a few extra minutes to make sure everyone had left before coming out of his hiding place. His legs were shaking, but his determination was stronger than ever. He found Lisa and Jennifer anxiously waiting in the hotel cafeteria. The two women almost fainted when they saw the evidence that Ethan had managed to gather. "This is more serious than we imagined," said Jennifer, scanning through the photographed documents. "Davis isn't just trying to take control of the company, he's stealing millions through these shell companies." "And now?" asked Lisa, her voice trembling slightly. "How are we going to expose all this without putting ourselves at risk?" Ethan looked through the cafeteria window, observing the movement in the hotel lobby. Westwood was there, talking with some executives. Even from a distance, it was possible to see the weight on his shoulders, the worry on his face. "We need to show this to Mr. Westwood," said Ethan. "But not here, not now. Davis has eyes and ears everywhere." "I have an idea," said Jennifer after a few moments of reflection. "Westwood always lunches alone on Saturdays at the Spring Valley Club restaurant. It's the only time when Davis doesn't watch him." "Then that's where we'll meet him," decided Ethan. "But first, we need to gather more evidence, and I know exactly where to look." The Spring Valley Club was an oasis of tranquility in the heart of the bustling city. With its well-kept gardens and classic architecture, the place seemed to exist in a parallel reality, where time flowed more slowly. Ethan arrived early that Saturday, accompanied by his grandmother Martha, who had insisted on coming along after hearing the whole story. "My child," she said as they walked through the club gardens, "are you sure you want to get involved in this? Sometimes adult problems are more complicated than they seem." "Grandma, you always taught me that doing the right thing isn't always doing the easy thing," replied Ethan, his eyes fixed on the restaurant where Westwood usually had lunch. Martha smiled, proud. "That's true, but I also taught you to be cautious." "How are we going to get in? This is a private club." Ethan smiled back. "Jennifer took care of that. She's a member of the club and put us down as her guests." Indeed, Jennifer had thought of everything. When they arrived at the reception, their names were already on the guest list. The restaurant was an elegant setting, with tables strategically arranged to ensure privacy for the clients. Ethan and Martha sat at a discreet table from where they could observe the entrance. At 1 o'clock sharp, Richard Westwood entered the restaurant. He was alone, as Jennifer had predicted, and seemed even more dejected than in previous days. Ethan waited for him to settle at his usual table before making any move. "Grandma, now's the time," said Ethan, getting up. "May God protect you, my child," replied Martha, squeezing his hand affectionately. Ethan crossed the restaurant with determined steps, although his heart was racing. Westwood recognized him immediately. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" asked the businessman, surprised. "Mr. Westwood, I need to show you something," said Ethan, sitting at the table without waiting. "For an invitation. It's about your company, about what Mr. Davis is doing." Westwood's face hardened. "Ethan, you're too young to get involved in these matters. Mark has been my partner for years. He's stealing from you," interrupted Ethan, his voice low but firm. "And I have proof." Before Westwood could protest, Ethan took from his pocket a flash drive that Lisa had prepared with all the collected evidence. "Here are the true financial reports, the proof of the shell companies, the forged documents, everything." Westwood took the flash drive with trembling hands. "How did you get this?" "Not alone," replied Ethan. "Jennifer and Lisa helped me. They tried to alert you before, but Davis threatened them." The businessman closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the impact of that revelation. When he opened them again, There was a mixture of pain and anger in his gaze. "I trusted him," murmured Westwood. "I gave him a stake in the company, treated him like a son." "Mr. Westwood," continued Ethan, "there's one more thing you need to know. Yesterday I overheard a conversation between Davis and some investors. They're planning to use fake documents to convince the board to remove you from the presidency at the next meeting." Westwood turned pale. "The meeting is on Monday. We don't have time." "Yes, we do," interrupted a familiar voice. It was Jennifer, who was approaching the table along with Lisa and Martha. "We got more evidence this morning." Lisa placed a beaky folder with new documents on the table. "Mr. Westwood, we found records of suspicious bank transfers. Davis has been diverting money from the company for years, using a network of shell companies." Westwood examined the documents with growing attention. His face changed as he understood the extent of the betrayal. "My God," he whispered. "How was I so blind?" "You weren't blind," said Ethan gently. "You just trusted someone who didn't deserve your trust." At that moment, Jennifer's cell phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and her face paled. "Mr. Westwood," she said urgently, "Davis just called an extraordinary board meeting for tonight. He's not going to wait until Monday." "He must have discovered that we're investigating," concluded Lisa, nervously. Westwood stood up, a new energy emanating from his posture. "Then we have no time to lose, Ethan. You and your grandmother will come with me. Jennifer, Lisa, gather all the documents you can. We're going to end this today." As they left the restaurant, Ethan felt his grandmother's hand on his shoulder. "Are you prepared for what's ahead, my child?" Ethan looked at Westwood, who was walking ahead of them with renewed determination. "Yes, Grandma. Now more than ever." The Golden Star Hotel's meeting room was immersed in palpable tension when Westwood entered, followed by Ethan, Martha, Jennifer, and Lisa. The board members were all already present, as was Mark Davis, who couldn't hide his surprise at seeing the group. "Richard," said Davis, quickly regaining his composure, "I didn't expect to see you accompanied by so many people. This is a private board meeting." "All these people have reasons to be here, Mark," replied Westwood, his voice firm. "In fact, they are essential for what we're going to discuss today." The board members looked at each other, confused. They were 12 men and women who for years had directed the course of the company alongside Westwood. Ethan observed each of them, noticing how some seemed nervous while others maintained carefully neutral expressions. "Board members," began Davis, moving to the head of the table, "I called this extraordinary meeting because the situation has become unsustainable. As you can see from the reports I sent this morning, Mr. Westwood's management has—" "These reports," interrupted Westwood, throwing the documents that Ethan had obtained onto the table. "Or the real ones?" Davis's face paled slightly, but he maintained his smile. "I don't know what you're talking about, Richard. Those are the company's official numbers." That's when Ethan stepped forward, his voice surprisingly firm for someone so young. "No, they're not. They're falsified documents that you created to deceive everyone." "And who is this boy?" asked one of the board members, adjusting his glasses. "This is Ethan," replied Westwood with pride, "and it was he who discovered the whole truth about what's happening in our company." Jennifer began distributing folders to each board member. "Here are the company's real numbers, along with evidence of the frauds committed by Mr. Davis in recent years." "This is absurd," exclaimed Davis, his face now red with anger. "You're going to believe the accusations of a boy and a secretary." "Why don't we let the documents speak for themselves?" suggested Lisa, connecting her laptop to the room's projector. On the screen, irrefutable evidence began to appear: bank transfers to shell companies, doctored contracts, manipulated reports. With each new revelation, the board members stirred in their chairs, whispering among themselves. "As you can see," continued Westwood, "while I was fighting to keep our company growing, my own partner was planning my destruction. Mark not only manipulated numbers to remove me, but also diverted millions through a network of shell companies." Ethan watched Davis carefully. The man who had always seemed so controlled was now sweating, his eyes moving rapidly among the board. Members seeking allies. "This is a conspiracy," shouted Davis, pounding the table. "Westwood is senile, can't you see? He brought a boy and 2 disgruntled employees to try to discredit me. That's when Martha, who until then had been observing everything in silence, stood up. Her presence, though silent, emanated a wisdom that made everyone pay attention. "You know, Mr. Davis," she said in her calm voice, "my grandson has a special gift. He can see the truth in people's eyes, and from the first moment he saw you, he perceived your falseness." "This is ridiculous," protested Davis, but his voice no longer had the same conviction. "Mr. Davis," intervened Ethan, "why don't you explain to the board about the meeting you had yesterday in your office? The one where you talked about how you were blackmailing employees and board members?" The silence that followed was deafening. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, especially those whom Ethan knew had been blackmailed by Davis. I don't know what you're talking about," stammered Davis. "Yes, you do," continued Ethan. "I was there, hidden in the bathroom of your office. I heard everything, including your threats against Jennifer." One of the most senior board members, Mr. Thompson, stood up. "I think we've seen enough. I propose an immediate vote for the removal of Mr. Davis from all his functions in the company, as well as a complete audit of all his actions in recent years." "Seconded," said another board member, followed by several others. Davis looked around, desperate, seeing his plan crumble. "You can't do this. I dedicated years." "No, Mark," interrupted Westwood, his voice laden with sadness and disappointment. "You destroyed, betrayed, manipulated, and now you're going to answer for all of it." The vote was quick and unanimous. Davis was immediately removed from his duties, and security was called to escort him out of the building. As he was being led away, his gaze met Ethan's one last time, a mixture of anger and disbelief in his eyes. "How?" he muttered as he passed by Ethan. "How did a kid manage to defeat me?" Ethan just smiled, remembering his grandmother's words. Sometimes what seems to be a very big problem can be solved with a small gesture of kindness. The days following the dramatic board meeting were intense at the Golden Star Hotel. A team of auditors occupied Davis's former office, scrutinizing each document, each record, each transaction. With each new discovery, the extent of the betrayal revealed itself to be even greater than they had imagined. Westwood, though relieved to have regained control of his company, felt the weight of reconstruction on his shoulders. On Monday morning, he called a meeting with all employees in the hotel's grand event hall. "In recent years," he began, his voice echoing through the microphone, "many of you have been victims of threats, blackmail, and injustice. Today, I want to say that this is over. Every employee who was unfairly removed will be reinstated. Every complaint will be investigated. And above all, we will rebuild this company on more solid foundations, trust and transparency." Ethan was sitting in the front row next to his grandmother, Martha. Jennifer and Lisa, now promoted to positions of greater responsibility in the company, smiled with tears in their eyes. "But before we begin this new phase," continued Westwood, "I want to publicly thank the people who made this possible. Jennifer Adams and Lisa Parker, who risked their careers to expose the truth. Mrs. Martha, whose wisdom guided us in the most difficult moments. And most importantly, a young man named Ethan." All heads turned to look at the boy, who blushed intensely. "Ethan," said Westwood, addressing him directly, "you taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes we need the innocence and purity of a child to see what is right in front of our eyes. Your courage and integrity saved not only my company, but the lives of hundreds of employees who depend on it." The audience applauded enthusiastically, while Martha hugged her grandson with pride. In the following days, changes began to happen quickly. Westwood implemented a new corporate governance system with more rigorous control mechanisms and whistleblowing channels for employees. Jennifer was appointed compliance director, while Lisa assumed the position of human resources manager. Ethan, in turn, became a kind of mascot for the hotel. Employees greeted him in the hallways, and stories about how a 12-year-old boy had unmasked a $1 million conspiracy began to circulate around town. One afternoon, while Ethan was helping his grandmother in the garden, Westwood appeared at their house. "Mrs. Martha, Ethan," he said, sitting on the garden bench, I've come to make a special invitation." "What kind of invitation?" asked Ethan, curious. "Well, we're creating a scholarship program for young talents," explained Westwood. "And you, Ethan, will be our first beneficiary. We want to ensure that you have access to the best education possible." Martha brought her, hands to her face, moved. "But this must cost a fortune." "It's the least I can do," replied Westwood with a smile. "Besides, I want Ethan to participate in the youth council we're creating. A group of teenagers who will help us see things from a different perspective, more honest and direct." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," suggested his grandmother, smiling. "Sometimes, my child, doing the right thing leads us down paths we never imagined." Westwood looked around the small garden, inhaling the fragrance of flowers that Martha cultivated with such care. "You know, Ethan, I spent years building luxury hotels, always seeking perfection in every detail. But it took coming to this simple garden to understand the true meaning of wealth." "And what is it?" asked Ethan. "Character, integrity, kindness," replied Westwood. "Values that your grandmother planted in you with the same care she dedicates to these flowers." At that moment, the old kitchen radio was playing soft music, and the afternoon sun painted the sky in golden hues. It was as if the universe was conspiring to make that moment even more special. "Mr. Westwood," said Ethan, "after a few moments of reflection, I accept your invitation, but with one condition." "Which is?" "That you come have coffee with us every Sunday," replied the boy with a smile. "Grandma makes the best cornbread in town." Westwood laughed, a genuine and joyful laugh that he hadn't given in a long time. "Deal, and I promise to bring the most interesting hotel stories to share with you." Martha got up to get coffee, leaving Ethan and Westwood chatting in the garden. From inside the kitchen, she observed the scene with a heart full of gratitude. Her grandson, who had always been special, now had the opportunity to share his gifts with the world in an even greater way. 6 months passed since the revelation of the conspiracy at the Golden Star Hotel. The small Midwest town had changed significantly during this period, and the hotel, once a symbol of distant power and luxury, had become a center of social transformation. Ethan, now studying at one of the best schools in the region, thanks to the scholarship offered by Westwood, divided his time between classes, the hotel's youth council, and his beloved garden. His exemplary grades and natural leadership ability made him an inspiration to other young people. On a Saturday morning, while Ethan waited for the start of another youth council meeting, he observed the movement in the hotel lobby. The place was different, not just in appearance, with its new, more welcoming colors, but mainly in the energy that emanated from the people. "Thinking about life, Ethan?" asked Jennifer, approaching with a folder of documents. "I was observing how everything has changed," he replied, smiling. "Remember how it was before?" Jennifer nodded, sitting next to him, in her new role as compliance director. She had implemented several significant changes in the company. "Yes, and a large part of that transformation began with you." The Youth Council, an idea that was born from the experience with Ethan, had become a model program. 15 teenagers from different social backgrounds met weekly to discuss improvements to the hotel and social projects for the community. "Ethan," called Lisa, who was approaching with a group of visitors, "these are representatives from other hotel chains. They've come to learn about our Young Advisors program." The business people looked with curiosity at Ethan, already familiar with his story, which had become something of a legend in the business world. How had a 12-year-old boy managed to unravel a conspiracy that experienced executives didn't notice? "Actually," explained Ethan to the visitors, "it wasn't anything extraordinary. My grandmother always taught me to observe people, to trust my instincts, and, most importantly, to not be afraid to do what's right." Westwood, who had silently arrived during the conversation, smiled with pride. His hotel, once focused only on profits and appearances, was now recognized for its social initiatives and administrative transparency. "You know," said Westwood to the visitors, "when Ethan saved our company, he didn't just prevent financial fraud. He taught us a new way of doing business." The businessman then led the group to see the hotel's new initiatives. The old ballroom had been transformed into a multi-purpose space where everything from business meetings to tutoring classes for underprivileged children took place. The hotel kitchen, previously restricted to guests, now offered culinary courses for young people from the community. "And this," said Westwood, opening the doors to a special room, "is our greatest pride." It was the Martha Development Center, named in honor of Ethan's grandmother. A space dedicated to social and educational projects, where hotel employees voluntarily shared their knowledge with the community. "My grandmother always says that knowledge is like water," commented Ethan to the visitors. "The more you share, the more it multiplies." At the end of that afternoon, after the youth council meeting, Ethan found his grandmother in the home garden, as he always did. Martha was especially happy that day. "You know, my child," she said while pruning her roses, "earlier today I went to the farmer's market and several people came to thank me." "Thank you for what, Grandma?" "For the courses at the hotel, for the opportunities that young people are having, for the change that began with you," she replied, her eyes shining with pride. "One lady told me that her son got a job in the hotel kitchen after the culinary course." Ethan smiled, helping his grandmother with the plants. The garden remained his favorite place in the world, where the most important lessons of his life had been learned. "Grandma, sometimes I think, what if I hadn't returned that folder to Mr. Westwood that day?" Martha stopped her work and looked directly at her grandson. "My child, in life there are no coincidences. You were placed in his path for a reason, and look at how many lives have been transformed because of that encounter." At that moment, Ethan's phone rang. It was Jennifer with exciting news. The youth council program would be implemented across the entire hotel chain, and Ethan had been invited to help with the expansion. "See?" said Martha, smiling at the joy on her grandson's face. "The seeds of kindness we plant always bear fruit. Sometimes it takes a while, but when they bloom, they transform the entire garden." The year was coming to an end, and the Golden Star Hotel was preparing for its traditional end-of-year celebration. But this time, it would be different. It wouldn't just be a corporate celebration, but an event that would unite employees, community, and the young people who had benefited from the hotel's new social projects. Ethan was especially busy with the preparations. As leader of the Youth Council, he coordinated a special presentation that would tell the story of the hotel's transformation. On the makeshift stage in the main hall, dozens of teenagers rehearsed their parts. "Ethan," called Westwood, observing the rehearsals, "you've transformed this place into something I never imagined possible." "Actually, Mr. Westwood, you're the one who gave this opportunity to all of us," replied Ethan, while adjusting some decoration details. The businessman smiled, his eyes scanning the hall. "You know, when I started in this business, I thought success was measured only by numbers on a spreadsheet. You taught me that true wealth is in people." At that moment, Jennifer and Lisa hurriedly entered the hall, carrying a surprise. The front page of the local newspaper featured a special article about the transformations at the Golden Star Hotel and their impact on the community. "Look at this," said Jennifer, showing the newspaper. "The report especially highlights the Young Advisors program. Other companies in the region are interested in implementing similar initiatives." The news was further confirmation that the work developed there was resonating far beyond the hotel walls. Ethan took the newspaper and read aloud a passage that particularly moved him. "In a world where business success is often confused with greed and individualism, the Golden Star Hotel proves that it's possible to build an empire based on human values." The story began with a 12-year-old boy who, with his extraordinary intuition and solid values, not only prevented fraud, but initiated a revolution in the way of doing business. "It's a beautiful article," commented Martha, who had just arrived at the hotel. She was now a constant presence there, coordinating the community garden that had been created at the back of the hotel. "Grandma," said Ethan, hugging her, "did you see? They mentioned your lessons about observing people and trusting instincts." "Yes, I did, my child," she replied, her eyes watery. "But you know what makes me most proud? Seeing how you used those lessons to help other people." The celebration would be the next day, and preparations continued at full steam. The entire town was abuzz with the event. Local merchants had been invited to exhibit their products, community cultural groups would perform, and students from the hotel's vocational courses would officially graduate. Late that afternoon, while the final details were being arranged, Ethan went up to the hotel terrace, his favorite place to think. From there he could see the whole town, including his house on the hill. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Westwood found him there contemplating the view. "What are you thinking about?" asked the businessman. "About how things have changed," replied Ethan. "About how a small act can trigger so many transformations." Westwood nodded, leaning on the terrace railing. "You know, Ethan, tomorrow I'm going to make an important announcement. At the celebration, I wanted you to be the first to know." Ethan looked at him curious. "I'm creating a foundation," continued Westwood. "The Golden Star Foundation, dedicated to expanding all the social work we started here. And I want you, when you're old enough, to take over its direction." Ethan was speechless for a moment. "But I'm still very young." "Exactly," smiled Westwood. "You have time to prepare, to study, to understand even better how you can help people. In the meantime, the foundation will be managed by a board of which your grandmother will be a part." At that moment, the town church bell began to ring, its tolls echoing through the city. It was as if destiny itself was marking this special moment. "Are you sure?" asked Ethan, still absorbing the news. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life," replied Westwood. "You taught me that to build something truly great, we need to have our heart in the right place. And your heart, Ethan, always has been." The night of the big celebration arrived, transforming the Golden Star Hotel into a true center of celebration. The main hall, decorated with flowers from the community garden cultivated by Martha, was full of people, employees, community members, students from social projects, and business people from throughout the region. Ethan, wearing his first suit, a gift from Westwood, marveled at the crowd gathering. Each face there had a transformation story to tell. There was Mary, the cleaning lady who now coordinated the hotel's adult literacy program, Jack, the young man who went from culinary courses to assistant chef, and many others who found new opportunities through the implemented changes. "Nervous?" asked Lisa, approaching with a smile. "A little," admitted Ethan, adjusting his tie. "I've never spoken to so many people." "Just be yourself," advised Jennifer, joining them. "That's how you changed everything, remember?" The event began with cultural presentations from community groups. The youth choir, formed by students from the social project, moved everyone with their performance. Next came the graduations from the vocational courses, where each student proudly received their certificate. Westwood took the stage for his speech, his imposing figure now marked by a serenity he didn't possess before. "A year ago," he began, "this hotel was just a business. Today it's a center of social transformation. And all this began with a simple act of honesty from a 12-year-old boy." The businessman then officially announced the creation of the Golden Star Foundation, revealing that it would be funded with 30% of the profits from the entire hotel chain. The news was received with an explosion of applause. "But the biggest announcement of the night," continued Westwood, "is not about money or structures. It's about people. Ethan, could you come up here?" With trembling legs, Ethan went up on stage. His grandmother Martha, seated in the front row, cried silently with emotion. "This young man," said Westwood, placing his hand on Ethan's shoulder, "taught me that true leadership doesn't come from authority, but from example. It doesn't come from power, but from integrity. And that's why today, in addition to announcing the foundation, I want to officially present him as my successor." A murmur of surprise ran through the hall, followed by a new wave of applause. "Of course," smiled Westwood. "This will only happen when he's ready, a few years from now. Until then, Ethan will continue his studies and learn every aspect of the business, always maintaining the special perspective that only he has to see the truth in people." Ethan approached the microphone, his heart beating strongly. He looked at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly and began to speak. "When I was younger, I thought that to change the world we needed big actions, special powers. My grandmother always told me that the greatest changes begin with small gestures. I didn't really believe that until that day when I saw a folder dropped on the ground. His voice broke for a moment, but he continued. Today, I understand that each of us has the power to make a difference. Sometimes it's returning a folder, other times it's giving an opportunity to someone who needs it, or simply being honest when it would be easier not to be. Ethan's words deeply touched those present. Many cried silently, others smiled, recognizing themselves in that story of transformation. The Golden Star Hotel is no longer just a hotel, concluded Ethan. It's a place where dreams come true, where people find hope, where small gestures transform into great changes. After the speech, while the celebration continued, Ethan found his grandmother in the hotel garden. Martha was watering her plants, as she always did when she needed to organize her emotions. "Grandma," said Ethan, sitting beside her, "do you think I'm ready for all this?" Martha smiled, that wise smile that always reassured her grandson. "My child, you were born ready. You just needed the right opportunity to show the world what I've always seen in you." At that moment, the night sky was especially starry. From somewhere inside the hotel came the sound of music and laughter. The small Midwest town, which once seemed so limiting for a boy's dreams, had now transformed into the epicenter of a silent revolution of kindness and transformation. "You know, Grandma," said Ethan, looking at the stars, "I think I finally understand what you always said about the garden flowers." "What, my child?" "That each one has its time to bloom. And when it blooms, it not only beautifies the garden, but inspires other flowers to bloom too." Martha hugged her grandson, and together they contemplated the hotel that now shone like a beacon of hope in the night. The story that had begun with a simple act of honesty had transformed into a legacy that would continue inspiring generations. And so, under the starry sky of that special night, Ethan understood that his journey was just beginning. The future opened before him, full of possibilities and new challenges, but now he knew that with honesty, courage, and an open heart, any dream was possible to achieve.